Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Michael, where'd you get the goat's milk? I got it from Molly again. I mean, your mother makes a few pennies. Why are you picking it up? It's not nice, son. You have to ask for it as a last resort. Vanessa stroked her son's head. The boy wanted to know how to help her better. Could she scold him for that? It was true that they lived poorly. So if it weren't for the Gypsy, they would see milk and butter only on holidays. Auntie's mom said early on that it was for my work. I helped her milk the goat and watered the cucumbers. Is it good to refuse payment for work if you didn't ask for anything yourself? Michael was only 6 years old, and he could not understand many things in his life. For example, why many people scold the old gypsy woman and consider her a witch. Did she do anything bad to anyone? Or why everybody has fathers, but he has Michael know? Is he a bad boy? And why is his mother laughed at and considered a loser? Isn't she the best in the world? She's so pretty. Her hair is white and white, as if it were silk or satin, and her eyes are still huge gray. So what? That she's a little skewed to one side. But that made Mom even touchable. I wanted to hug her and protect her from the world. So why are so many people in their village unloved? The boy used to ask his mother these questions, but she always gave him general answers. The old gypsy woman was another matter. She always talked to him like an adult and tried to explain things to him in a way that he understood. For example, she explained that she was considered strange because she was of a different nationality and had only lived here for 10 years. And they make fun of Mom because they don't know people and have no intelligence. Molly replied, "And why doesn't he have a father?" They say that sometimes a father doesn't appear right away. But one day Michael will have a father, the most reliable and good one. You just have to be a good boy and be on your best behavior. Then the right father will come along. Molly really did live in the village in isolation. No one could say anything bad about her. But people didn't like that she was secretive and didn't socialize with anyone. Why doesn't she live with other Roma? Everyone knows that gypsies usually stick together. What had she done that her own people didn't accept her? The gypsy woman's household was also enviable. She bought a dilapidated house behind a neglected plot 10 years ago. And now the house, the garden, and the farm are a sight to behold. The animals are tended. Everything grows and everything blooms. She gets up early, but she lives alone. So who cares? Maybe grief. What's chasing a man? He escaped. It's not for us to judge. Grief can make anyone live alone and drive him to the end of the world. That's what the good villagers used to say. Grandpa Robert. Emily, the village teacher. Grandpa Robert was happy to tutor the boy anytime he wanted to, and taught him how to solder transistors and resistors. When you grow up, you'll be able to fix anything, Grandpa Robert told him. He himself really went to the city and picked up broken laptops there. So thanks to him, little Michael already had a good computer and a lot of poor villagers. The equipment worked properly, and if anything, it was in disrepair. Grandpa fixed it for free. Of course, Michael realized that you were not his own grandfather, but still considered him a relative and loved him very much. "When I grow up, I'll be rich and I'll take you to me," I told the boy to his grandfather. The main thing is to become a man. Getting rich is not the main thing. Why should I be taken away? I can still walk with my legs, and I'm going to walk until I meet my grandmother. The whole village knew that Grandfather Robert's wife had died 15 years ago, but he had never married. His children and grandchildren came to visit him from town, but he never used them. I ran the place myself, always fixing things for someone. But what he liked most of all was building homemade computers. That's why the villagers jokingly called him Gates. They used to say, "Gates, what are you doing there again? Are you going to make a new one out of some trash?" I wish they had, Grandpa Robert joked. And he who jokes a lot will have to fix the equipment at his own expense. Since I am Gates, so I will take money from you to become a billionaire, in whose honor you named me. The banter started, but it wasn't mean at all. Most of the villagers loved Robert, even the meanest ones. His character was gold. Didn't drink, didn't whine, always happy and ready to help people. Another light in the window, besides Robert's diet and Gypsy, Molly, was for Michael and his mom, Emily. The village teacher taught him to read when he was only 4 years old. So now in his 6th, Michael was confidently reading, writing, learning poetry by heart, and even typing on a laptop his grandfather Robert had given him. Emily had also taught literature to his mother when she was young. What a smart and deeply feeling girl your mom was. Such a capable student. My mom's teacher told me in an email. I kept thinking she'd get into college, but of course, with a father like that. How is that possible? It's a miracle she's still alive. But they call mom stupid. You're not a boy. They don't understand a lot of things. You should watch yourself. Your mom is very talented. And I'm sure there will be someone who will appreciate her deep nature and inquisitive mind. You'll see, you'll have the best dad in the world, won't you? Said Emily. And Michael believed it. That's the way it's gonna be. I'm glad to say so. So Mommy really will be happy someday. We just have to wait a little longer. But Vanessa and her sons had their detractors. Miranda and Evelyn especially disliked the Gypsy. Miranda was only 35, but she gossiped more than any old grandmother. There was talk that Vanessa had given birth to her Michael from a womanizer husband, but no one had any proof. And yet her husband Michael was still Evelyn. I guess that's why the rubber band's so angry. It's a well-known fact. If a husband doesn't like his wife, she'll meddle in other people's business. What else can she do? Actually, Cindy didn't like Vanessa anymore, but since she sometimes stopped by, the old Gypsy was bombarded with Miranda's words. But with Cindy, it's more or less clear. But why Evelyn was so angry with Molly, no one understood. She'd think of anything. She pawned a cow and stole a lucky horseshoe. But if Molly had taken from whom, when the whole village would have known long ago. Evelyn was already 60, just like Molly, and it seemed like there was nothing to find out. But she wouldn't stop. Miranda, you heard. Again, it's quietly stuck to the radio for milk from somewhere far away, not ours. And they brought the girl with them again. And they talked for a long time. Evelyn told me for a long time. What did they talk about? Miranda perked up her ears. Fresh gossip was just what she needed, a breath of fresh air, something to talk about in the village. Life was so boring, not much going on. Since last year's wedding of the old would be Sam and his neighbor. There's nothing else to discuss. They live peacefully, as it happens. They walk hand in hand like young people and can't stop looking at each other. It's disgusting. If only I knew Cindy. If only I knew it's the bastards who turn on the radio when someone comes to see them and say quietly, quietly. And when I got closer, the dog wouldn't drink it. She yelled at me so angry that I ran away quietly. Oh, what a nasty fate. She was told by a neighbor. The dog Molly, like the Gypsy herself, appeared in the village unknown from whence, all shabby and worse as death. It looked strange. The head was small, and the torso as if from some other larger dog. There was almost no hair on the head, neck, and paws. But on the back, it was like a leopard with similar spots, only gray. And the eyes were so dreary, even now that the dog was long gone. She looked as if from the other side of the world. That's why they called her Tyson in the village. And only the old Gypsy woman persisted in calling her Sunshine. How can such a ghost be compared to the sun? She's a strange Gypsy woman, maybe even crazy. The dog Molly loved Molly madly and always guarded her. The Gypsy and the dog acted like a puppy. He would run and look at his mistress with a delighted, ingratiating gaze. There was no trace of longing in his gaze. It was as if the communities were X-rayed. If people treated Molly kindly, he slept and did not even get up at their appearance. And as soon as the ill-wishers came to the plot, then expect trouble, Tyson. Sunshine, so said the fangs, which was clear. You take one more step, and you're gonna walk away without the part of your body you need most. Most of the villagers had long ago decided to call the dog Tyson because he was clearly not sunny in character. And calling the dog Tyson was a bit dreary. Yes, and Molly was angry. She said she frowned in the eyebrows who calls longing. To that she, and will get involved. And the name doesn't freeze. Suited the dog best, for he hardly ever slept. He was always on guard for his mistress. And so it stuck with the dog. It's a cross between Tyson and Sunshine. Is it true what they say about Molly being a felon and a felony convict? Cindy asked. No, they don't. I had the local precinct run her through the database a long time ago. There's nothing on her record. Evelyn sighed regretfully. She really wished the hated Gypsy would have turned out to be my nexus, and a ruler, or at least a thief. Well, Gypsies, they're masters at forging documents. Maybe she's not who she says she is. Who can tell the Gypsies apart? Finca said hopefully. She really wanted to know something. I tried to eavesdrop on Molly's conversation when a woman came to see her, and I was lucky the dog was locked up in the house. Yeah, as I approached, that rascal. And the way she sings at Tarabarov, as if she knew. She's a sorceress, that's what I say. Even the locals are afraid to steal anything from her garden. And they're not afraid of anyone. She must be a witch, I'm sure, Evelyn said. And then she said, tell me something. Is it true that Vanessa is going to be fired from the store? The woman's eyes lit up with excitement, eager to punish at least the Gypsy's friend. Evelyn knew her husband was having an affair with Vanessa, so Vanessa hated her more than she hated herself. So she must know all the news. Yeah, it was coming to that. Cindy said regretfully. Only Molly whispered something to her, and she didn't fire the long milk. What a day it's been without any good news. Evelyn sighed, and the women parted, agreeing to tell each other by all means. As soon as either of them knew anything, almost a year passed, and the woman and her little girl suddenly stopped coming to Molly for milk because of consumption. And the old Gypsy woman gave up right away. She was sad and silent all the time. Vanessa tried to comfort the old Gypsy as much as she could and sent Michael to come to her as often as possible. Today the Gypsy had somehow tied himself to her son, and now the woman was in big trouble, most likely even dismissal. Get out of here. Who brought that disgusting song in here? Yelled Michael, the owner of Vanessa's store. He ripped my pants. He ripped them to shreds. Why did you bring him here? Vanessa didn't remember getting off the sled, and then suddenly she found in her pocket the uniform of S. She remembered in the morning she went to Molly's to borrow eggs and showed the dog the sugar. She'd been distracted by her son and had to get ready to go to the store, so she forgot to fulfill her promise. Vanessa didn't understand one thing. Why did the dog attack Michael's pants? He'd never done anything like that in the company. Vanessa remembered her unhappy history of working at the store. She'd gotten the job when she was very young. Michael and his wife were having a womanizer husband spat, had a mistress in town, and he started going there a little too often. So she gave him a boycott in the relationship. In the village it was rumored that Michael and Miranda are leading at least Miranda and Gossip Girl or Siegel. But he won't put up with her. Well done, Miranda. Gather up what's left of your feminine pride and send him away. The old women used to tell her. At the time, Vanessa knew nothing for sure about the twists and turns of their relationship. Her father, who brought her up, had just died, and she was left all alone. She had lost her mother when she was still a child. She was always shunned by the villagers. She was not ugly and everything was in her hands. But her braid, though it was not noticeable, but it was firmly stuck to her nickname, Zegagulina. It's a shame, of course. And also after her father was gone, Vanessa started to stir things up. Whenever anyone asked her a question, she'd just hang there with her mouth open, thinking about something of her own. So the neighbors had another reason to mock her. Only Michael seemed to overlook her faults and always spoke to her affectionately. Being an experienced seducer, he easily brought their friendship to something much more intimate. And resisting this one source of warmth, Vanessa found herself unable to resist. Vanessa, We're about to get divorced in May, and we're gonna make a life with you. You'll see, I'll make a good husband." Michael promised her and asked her to be gentle with him and not to frown. He would not let her down and would not cheat. Vanessa, of course, didn't believe it would work out. Yes, but the situation at that moment was so drowning. So she was already dreamily gazing into the water of their wide, but deep and fast rivulet. Sometimes she wanted to disappear forever. Everything remembered her mother, who alone had been gentle and kind to her. Vanessa took out her last gift, a round silver mirror with an Orthodox cross on the back. It had been inherited from her mother and was the girl's only possession. Someone had made the mirror by hand. 50 years ago or more. The cross was rough, and underneath it was an inscription in Old Slavonic, "Mother of God, save and keep me sinful." When her mother was dying, she was only 7 years old, and she read this inscription for a long time. "Mother, save and preserve me." She thought she was speaking to her mother, and only later the village priest explained to her that the mistake was not so big. After all, the Mother of God, mother to all Orthodox Christians who address her. And so it turned out that in time the image of Mother and Mother of God merged for Vanessa into one. "Vanessa, don't tell your father that it's silver. Otherwise he'll drink it like he always does. I always told him the mirror was iron. And you hold on. If you feel bad, look in the mirror and remember how beautiful and clever you are. And know that I bless you from the other world. May our Mother Goddess keep you and not forsake you." The mirror really helped when the waters of the river began to pray to her too much. Vanessa took out the silver mirror and immediately felt as if someone was hugging her from behind and throwing a warm shawl over her shoulders. Her skinny shoulders stopped shaking, and her teeth were no longer clattering. The world no longer seemed alien, scary, and hostile. Mom's mirror was like magic. She hid it from her father. Dad really drank it away. All he could do after Mom's death was pretend to grieve and say, "Don't discuss me, my daughter. I loved your mother. By the way, they say in the village that she outlived you by Rick. But I pretended I didn't know anything. If I didn't, I'd have killed her. That's how much I loved her." With these words, my father knocked over another iron cap, with fuel and smeared snot all over the wrong face. How could you have any other way? Dad, Vanessa thought at the time. After all, her father was not one of those alkists that successfully combine work and drinking. He just drank and whined and drank. So his mother worked for him all of his life. And after she was gone, Vanessa, from an early age, had to take on the labor of providing for the family. Her grandfather, Robert, and her village teacher helped a lot. They tried to give her the easiest jobs they could, paid what they could, and they always fed her, and Emily even fixed her up some closet, put her ears in her own clothes, and she bought new shoes, and all this from a penny's wages, and she had a large family to support. Vanessa was uncomfortable accepting such gifts from her fellow villagers who were as poor as she was, but they helped her in their own way and gladly. It was impossible to refuse. When she turned 15, Molly came to the village, and it became even easier. The old gypsy always gave her some easy work and paid her too much. The girl was uncomfortable, but there was nowhere to go. Still, as soon as the opportunity arose, she got a job at the store. She had just turned 18. She was young and stupid. That's when someone with horns and hooves made her contact her wife. Before she could even blink an eye, her belly began to round out. Michael got away with it, reconciled with his wife, and told her that no one should know anything and recommended that she get rid of the baby. He even slipped some crumpled bills into her hand, like 30 pieces of silver for betrayal. When Vanessa felt the touch of her former lover's sweaty palm in her hand, she sobered up and realized that there was no love at all. There was only one obsession. She tossed him the money on the wooden floor of the store and said, "You, Michael, will start sending me to the city for goods, and I will pretend that I have a cohole there. Don't worry, no one will find out," she told him. And since then, she never once looked at him as if he were a familiar person. She always spoke only in your name and only as a stranger. And so it came to pass that she stayed to work for him. In the city, Vanessa even agreed with a guy to give her a ride to the village for a small sum of money. Coincidentally, the guy's name was also Michael. So when he had a son, Michael, people, even though they assumed that he could be born not only from the fiancé who left her, but to her face, no one said anything. And now Tyson has put an end to her work. Her ex-lover and the father of her child fired her. On the one hand, it's scary. After all, she only has enough savings for 2 months at the most. On the other hand, she should have ended the relationship a long time ago. Still, why was this Tyson clinging to her ex's pants out of the blue? Vanessa sighed and led the dog to steal away. She decided not to say anything. But it was like the gypsy was clairvoyant. "What did your ex-boyfriend fire you for?" Molly asked. Actually, Vanessa never told about her relationship with Michael. But it was like the old gypsy knew everything. Maybe these people really have the ability to see the past, the present, and the future. But she, Vanessa, never even showed her hand. And Molly never read cards either. She had a small silver cross around her neck, and there were icons in the house. The gypsy explained to her once that she had been banished for adopting the Orthodox faith, and she added that there were other reasons. There were many. By the grimace of pain on the older woman's face, Vanessa realized then that it was not worth questioning her in detail about the past. And she had never asked the younger woman anything either, but she always knew everything. That was the way it was between them. Fired Aunt Molly. Gotta look for another job, Vanessa said. She didn't even wonder how the gypsy knew that she was looking for another job. The young woman was used to the fact that she always knew everything about everyone. The gypsy rarely made her judgments, but they were rarely accurate. For example, she called her former lover a worthless scoundrel. She rarely said anything bad about people, though. Even the village gossipers she pitied and talked about. Miranda and Evelyn are miserable women. Living with Walker husbands is like waking up yourself. You're not even involved, but you feel it, and you always want to get clean. So don't judge them. Vanessa, it's not from a good life. They talk. They don't want to change anything in their lives, so they're looking for someone to sling mud at. They've got a lot of dirt on them. Why don't you go see Brown? I hear he's looking for employees. He needs a woman to look after his daughter. It's a live-in job. Christopher came by the other day, said it's paying $40,000. But he hasn't hired anyone yet. But if you're fired, there must be a job waiting for you somewhere. Make sure you go. Make sure you go. Take Michael with you. Let the rich man see something with the baby, so you won't have to go anywhere. It's a job with room and board, Molly said. Molly's face suddenly brightened at the mention of the rich man. Strange, because the old gypsy had not been herself for a year. Vanessa herself had heard from the villagers about the mysterious rich man. He settled not far away in the big house about 10 years ago. And almost none of the locals liked him. How could they not? At night, he had some vicious Caucasian sheepdogs running around on his property. It seems he let them off the chain on purpose so that no one from the village would steal from him. So if they don't trust him, why did he have to settle near them? After all, it is clear that a luxurious house next to their modest houses will cause only envy. Strange man. Notebooks. So he only takes guest workers. They say, Vanessa said. She knew that this fact angered the locals. Most of all, seeing as the village is already not very good with jobs, and he pays these newcomers $40,000. And this is despite the fact that in their village, it is a big problem to scrape together even $20,000. But this rich man had a lot of glitter in his eyes. You go, honey. My heart tells me that Stephen might take you. I've known some of this family. He's not such a bad man. He's just got his own fate and his own circumstances. Don't be afraid. Why are you trembling? Like an aspen leaf. Not just any rich man. This fool is probably more decent than your Michael, Molly said. And that wish to go, and get a job at Stephen's. Why did it sound like an order? Although the Gypsy woman spoke calmly, kindly, and even relaxed. In the meantime, chasing the twigs and flies away from her face. Then lazily added, "But it's time for me to milk my beauty. Michael Yorwile played all day. You do not wake him up. You can help me put the table together," asked the old woman. "I will." Aunt Molly, Vanessa said. She was surprised to find out how the old Gypsy woman knew the rich man's name. Nobody in the village knew his name. Maybe she really is a clairvoyant. Vanessa peeked through the window and saw that little Michael was really asleep, as they call it, without hind legs. She dismounted, walked down the paths of colored strips cut from all sorts of junk and artfully woven into a rug, and began to assemble the table. "Well, I'll go and try to get a job with this Stephen. He won't take it. I wasn't counting on it. Then I won't be too upset." Vanessa thought, "That's good. Go tomorrow." Molly's voice sounded nearby, and the young woman didn't even realize that she had responded to her thoughts. She didn't say anything out loud. The next day, Vanessa and her son went to hire a rich man. "They won't even let you in. It's a mess." Evelyn laughed at her. "Not enough of our villagers went. He didn't take anyone. He probably needs a young photo model who's quick and beautiful, not someone like you. You open your mouth and flies fly in, and they'll die." While you're thinking, the village gossip laughed. "My hubby kicked her out of the store. It's about time. If you can't work for 7,000 or 7,000, you can't work for 40,000. Cindy laughed at her tone. It was she who wanted to give her husband a reason, and the wool of Stasov's main enemy, local dog Marchuk. Those constantly fought when they met. Barchuk lived in the yard and was also an unbred dog, but he thought he was not a mongrel, but a nobleman. Why did they dislike each other? Nobody really knew. There was talk of a cold war between their owners, Evelyn and Molly. Either way, it worked. All that was left was to cut the rope that Tyson was tied to. And what he respected about Vanessa was a matter of opinion. It was obvious. After all, she took the second place of honor at the dog after Molly, and on the third was Vanessa's son Michael. But Vanessa didn't know anything about Miranda's devious plans, so she grimaced and vowed to get a job. And her thoughts were not very cheerful. Maybe those bad guys were right. Who'd give her up? Single mom. Barrel-braked crooked. Of course, about the fact that someone more skillful than her to manage the household, the women said untrue. A woman's movements were always precise and dexterous. The work in her hands argued. She took after her mother, a hard-working, clever woman. But on the subject of her looking silly and slightly skewed, it was all true. Vanessa herself didn't understand how it was that everything was smooth and clear in her mind. And when she opened her mouth, she was sure to stutter and say something stupid. Only with close people she managed to speak clearly and meaningfully. And at the job interview, she'd just as soon be embarrassed. But she had to keep her face and do her best. She's got her son with her. We can't fall down in the mud. They say a lot of stupid things about her in the village, and she wanted her son to be proud of her. "So your name is Vanessa?" Stephen asked. He was scrutinizing her and her son. He looked casual, wearing jeans and a t-shirt. Nothing special, just a normal, fit, athletic man in his early 30s. Blue eyes, and an early bald spot starting to appear. The only things that caught his eye were his shoulders, which were too broad for his build, and his heavy chin. You could see that he could stand up for himself if he needed to. He asked if her name was really Vanessa. The woman nodded. She was afraid to say anything because she would stutter again. "Yes, that's my mom. She's very honest and hardworking. You'll see. She'll never steal anything from you, and everything in the house will be shiny." What is the house? Look in there right now. Not a speck of dust. Not a speck of dust. All the cushions are knocked down, and there's no fresh bread to bake. It's like this every day. And she's been raising me alone since I was a kid. Michael was using words like a machine gun, and there was no stopping him. The child even choked, explained, It must be said, something else important and decisive that will help Mommy to get the job. After all, she cried all night secretly from her son. And in the evening, Uncle Michael, the owner of the village store, who had fired her, knocked on the door and said, "If you are a fool, if you say a word about my wife, you may not be able to save your son," and waved his fist in front of his stony face, even squeezed his knuckles into his cheek. "Don't hope to pressure me. Stupid woman. Why are you being lazy?" "Michael?" Mom answered surprisingly calmly, though she usually always stuttered. "I've never asked you for anything. What's gotten into you?" Little Michael saw that his mother was trembling with fear, though she tried not to show it. So she lied about what Evelyn said. "Are you going to prove paternity to me now?" Michael slowed down. "Well, if we parted peacefully, it's better for you not to ask me for money. And don't impose yourself on me." "Got it." The man blushed again with anger, and his fist was again in front of her nose. Michael already wanted to find himself and clawed at this Michael, as Tyson had done in the morning. But it was as if the mother sensed it. She locked the door and went out on the porch and said quietly, "Go on, Michael, go on home." And then she didn't click herself. It doesn't take much courage to threaten a woman. And a woman can stand up for herself sometimes. "I don't need you. I've never needed you. Be well." Michael is dazed and cheggled into the night. By his boots, Michael realized that the man had had a lot to drink that night. That's why he was so scared, and he strove with all his might to make sure his mom got the job. They would leave the village, and his mother would never again assign the door to the old active trunk and close the windows with iron shutters, fastening them securely from the inside with long, thick old nails. Even for the toilet that night, she forbade the child to go to the yard and brought home a bucket. It was only like that when he was little, even though his mom said it was okay and nothing had changed. But the boy knew for sure. This job needed like a breath of air. So Molly told him yesterday that he should go with his mother to that Pugachev and support her in every possible way. "You're a young man, but you're a man and a protector." The rich man's voice interrupted the memory of the boy of last night. "Michael, but we don't need anything. We only have to look after my daughter, feed her, play with her. I think you two have become friends. I see you're a serious guy. When can you and your mom move in?" Stephen asked. "I could move in today," Michael said. "We're quick on the uptake." Vanessa tried to mumble something, but it didn't come out well. Stephen thought she wanted to discuss how much they would pay. So he said, "I'll pay you 80,000 R a month, payable weekly in advance, plus board and lodging. Is that okay with you?" He asked and looked at Vanessa in a very kind way, as if he had known her for 1,000 years. "No way. That's a lot of money. I don't even have any experience." The woman tried to object. She felt ashamed that Michael had pressed the pity of Stephen. He didn't seem like a bad man, but she was richer than that. She thought he would talk down to her and humiliate her like Evelyn was a pig. "So it suits her," Stephen summed up. "Then here's an advance." He took 4 red papers out of the envelope and counted them in front of her. Then he added, "And don't argue. The men have already discussed everything. So it's settled." The man winked at Michael, and the boy winked back, saying, "Yes, the real men have already worked it out, and there's no need to interfere." "Can we see our room?" Michael asked. The boy could not believe in his happiness and wanted to feel it with his hands and make sure that he was not dreaming. Vanessa blushed and tried again to say something. "Don't mind your son. It's just his first interview with me. That's why he's nervous." "The kid's right," Stephen said. "Wendy will show you around." "Wendy," Stephen called out, and on the doorstep, as if by magic, appeared a pretty woman of about 60 years in a neat gray dress, like a uniform. Her hair was smooth, combed, and her face radiated good-naturedness. She even stroked Michael's head and led him by the hand. But when she took a closer look at Vanessa, she suddenly became dazed and froze like a halt, staring at Stephen. Then all of them. Then Nancy said, Stephen, in the meantime, show our new nanny and her son their room. And get the boys to help them move their things right today. Wendy nodded and ushered mother and son into a bright 2-room apartment with its own bathroom and toilet. One room is for the son, and the other for you, the woman explained. Stephen is a good man. You'll like it here. Will you meet Lisa tomorrow? She's not walking, you see. And she went to the doctor today. But she's a nice girl. She's just sad because her mom's gone, and she's being raised by her father. Well, you'll find out soon enough. Is the service apartment all right for you? Nancy asked. Is it? Of course, it's like a palace to us. In our building, you know, even the toilet was outside. I was worried about my son. And now I'll be able to save money from my beggar's wages. And when he grows up, he'll go to the army because he's so smart. Suddenly, Vanessa said in a completely normal tone of voice. She felt that the woman was being kind to her. Her fear was gone. Suddenly, Vanessa thought, and why is she burdening a strange woman with her personal plans? She blushed and tried to justify herself for having said too much. My dear, it's all right. I'm from the neighboring village too. I didn't grow up in the king's chambers. Of course, for a mother, her child is the most important thing. I think Michael and Lisa will be friends. Well, here's your keys and your pass. You'll be down in 20 minutes. I'll send the guys to help you move your stuff. They'll wait. How much is it? Okay, the woman asked. All right, Wendy, and we'll bundle up later tonight. Then we'll come by ourselves. I still have to say goodbye to my neighbor. Leave the house to her, Vanessa said. She was very glad that she wouldn't have to spend another night shivering waiting for Michael to arrive. And she would not hear the jeers of her fellow villagers in this house. Aunt Molly, you look after my house. Oh, and one more thing. No offense, but I owe you so much and I got an advance. Take it from me, Aunt Molly. Don't hurt me. I remember how she used to take care of my boy and mine and give us milk on credit, but never took any money for it. She said Michael was helping with the garden. But I know how he helps. He tries, of course, but not enough. Vanessa, I'm embarrassed to give money to the old gypsy. She always wanted to do something for an old woman. And here's such a case. It's like a miracle, a job, and an advance. Where have you ever seen such a thing? If it wasn't for the old gypsy woman, she wouldn't have even applied for the job. Vanessa, what are you saying? Don't you realize that your boy is a joy? And what about you? So you're like a daughter to me. No, don't insult me. I'd be happy to look after your house for free. What's your ex doing walking around? Blacker than a cloud. The gypsy woman, as always, without transition, talked about what frightened and worried the young woman. Vanessa told about yesterday's visit and the fact that he had threatened her for some reason and referred to Evelyn as having said something. And about the fact that she's going to establish paternity. Evelyn, you'd better keep an eye on your old Liam. He's out of his mind, but he's after every skirt. She-wolf, Molly said angrily. She always formulated her thoughts clearly and concisely, as was the custom in their village. Although Vanessa had always thought before that gypsies never said anything straightforwardly, and how Orientals went around. Yes, around. But Molly had long ago become something of her own and native at the chewing and behind the house. So, is your ex yours? Yeah, and the others that were pushing it didn't do any harm. The old woman summarized. The conversation was interrupted because in the house ran, panting, and Michael followed him, ran away that Aunt Molly. I brought him a little present. You can. The boy showed a couple of wieners packed in a cellophane bag. Well, if Mommy allowed it, why can't you? The gypsy answered. She always smiled when she saw Michael. Let my sunshine eat from the hands of a good boy. Hearing his very first name given to Molly, the dog wagged his tail like a puppy and licked her hands, forgetting the coveted treat he had just held in his sight. There'll be sunshine. Go on, treat. After all, if it wasn't for you, Michael, Mama wouldn't have found such a good job. she'd still be sitting in a stupid store on a tiny salary and throwing herself in 3 legs and 2 shifts. That's right, the old gypsy woman winked at Vanessa. The woman smiled and nodded. That's right. How great it all worked out. Working for her ex had drained her of all her strength and self-respect. He exploited her, knowing she had nowhere else to go, but she put up with it. After all, the main thing was to get her son back on his feet. The dog, having heard the permission of the mistress, happily pounced on the treats. But Michael gave him a small piece to stretch the joy of watching the rapturous message. That one sat down and grimaced, glanced at the wieners as if she was the one who had to give permission to take a little more bite of her own. Time flew by quickly, and Vanessa was getting ready for her new home. The Stephen workers had promised to pick them up at 9 o'clock. There was only half an hour left. It wasn't far from Molly's house. The villagers tried to stop her on the way and ask her what kind of work and how the rich man lived. But Vanessa only waved away, as if she herself had not yet understood anything. In general, Stephen took her word that she would not tell the people in the village anything about how he lived and about the order of the house. But even if it was not so, and she would not give her word, the woman herself realized that there was no need to increase envy. And how did everyone around her know that she had already been hired? After all, the dizzying change had occurred only today. In vain, her fellow villagers considered Vanessa stupid. She was just one of those people who could not always formulate their thoughts in a coherent way. In fact, the young woman was honest, decent, and quite pretty. And the fact that her strength so would have fallen on them, a shelf in the cellar, which on the snot-fixed father, she would have looked at them then, probably would have been less out of the chase, living her life. The woman herself had not noticed. But now she walked smoothly and confidently, didn't try to ingratiate herself to anyone. Not to anyone, not to anyone. What, ha 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 ha. You found a rich man. Wait for you soon with the second one. Angrily threw her Michael, who was hiding inside her fence and scared her very much. The woman wanted to answer something, but as luck would have it, Michael was followed by Tyson, who hoped to continue the banquet. So the father of her child was tongue-tied, and I didn't have to say anything. Michael, you can bring more goodies later, but in the meantime, get ready. The car will be here in 20 minutes to pick us up. She checked her things one more time. She sat down, and Michael sat down next to it. Then Vanessa looked in her mom's silver mirrors for good luck. The Lady of Heaven and Earth read the prayer, and hearing the noise of the motor, she said thank you to this house. Let's go to the other one. Thank you. Thank you for the hardware. Michael and pulled his mother by the hand to the car. In the meantime, a few polite guest workers had already carried their things into the car. Vanessa and Michael did not know what awaited them in their new life, but they hoped that it would not be worse. Like many villagers, they were grateful for everything they had today. And they didn't think much about tomorrow. Today they are fed safely, and thank God. All they have to do is to do their job as best they can and hope for the best, that Stephen will turn out to be a fair and generous employer and will appreciate their labor. Vanessa and Michael, Robert and Emily said goodbye to their grandfather in the afternoon, so there was nothing else to keep them here. After all, only good neighbors and kind people keep in the village, and they will often visit them often. And now, at last, with gifts and thanks, not with requests as before. It had been several weeks since they had settled into their new home. Michael has been stopping by Molly's house almost every week and telling her, "What is it, Molly? We're living the dream. Look what I brought for Kosovo." The boy pointed to the real meat heels and said with admiration, "No wieners are eaten in this house. Wendy personally makes mincemeat from the best quality meat. I did not finish, the dog left, because he helped my mom to get fired from the evil Uncle Michael and protected us when we left." Michael briefly recounted how that uncle called him a bastard again and tried to hurt my mom before we left. "Oh, Sunshine's gonna be so happy. Come here, buddy." Molly called the dog, and in a couple of seconds a couple of enthusiastic classes were staring at Wendy's culinary creations. The dog sniffed the air with delight. He had never tasted such a treat before. The troop was distracted, and Molly was content to distract the kid from the painful subject of being an illegitimate child. And he had a dash in his father's name. His own father, and he's such an asshole, the Gypsy thought. But why should she be surprised? She'd gotten knocked up by her wife herself. But she thought Liam was free, and he even promised to marry her according to Gypsy customs and the law. But when she got pregnant, she found out what those promises were worth. Molly sighed. How did her daughter resemble that scoundrel of a husband, Evelyn? And she was so beautiful. Her eyes were gray as a lake, her hair white, silky, pure. She was a real fairy. There was nothing of Molly's daughter in her at all. Not her salt black hair, not her fiery eyes, not her teeming life. She was definitely different. As they say, not of this world. How can a child be condemned for being illegitimate? Isn't every human being born a welcome guest on this earth? Isn't anyone without sin? Molly, I've sometimes thought that people are like the seriously ill. Some from the asylum, so violent and inadequate in their perception of the world. There's something wrong with their head and their heart, and others just go about their lives in a crooked way. Yeah, it's good to be young. Life hasn't begun to put you through its trials yet, but little as they say, you go through a couple of trials and see what you are. The old Gypsy woman could still somehow understand the young green ones who are forbidden from prison and illegitimate births, but she could not understand how her peers and peers portray themselves as so always right. Listen to them, so pure angels, but their faces are evil, their tongues poisonous. Where do they come from? She and Jenna were separated by the same evil tongues. Her daughter's been gone a year, and Molly can't get her son-in-law to let her see her granddaughter. He's not a bad man, but he's stubborn as a lamb. He's trying to convince the grandmother, and she's worried. And the girl feels bad enough as it is. How could a child, having seen her native river, feel worse? Did she think she'd outlive her own daughter? Fate gave them not many years of communication. Well, thank goodness for that. If she had known that she would find Jappa and her granddaughter, she would have agreed to endure much more of the swearing, insults, and suspicion she had received in the village. Here is Liam Evelyn, the husband by whom she has a daughter. Ever since she came to the village, he constantly spread dirty rumors about her, saying that she was a criminal and a sorceress and a thief, and his tongue was as red as a broomstick. Such a tongue would wash toilets worse than any woman. And what kind of a hero is he? He's been hanging around women all his life, and he steals flour from the factory where he works and takes it home in sacks. And if he goes on a bender before a month, you can't wait for him. And he's so judgmental. I don't care if it's just her taking it out on Vanessa. That young fool Michael, and he's happy to do his best. He's got no brains of his own. That's how she bullies her own son and his mother. Molly's thoughts were interrupted by Michael. They had already finished their feast with Stas and came back. Theater expert. And this was given to you by your mother. She said it was the most precious thing she had for luck. A mirror made of real silver. Mom saved it from her grandfather, and he never drank it. Michael proudly handed over the old mirror, and the Gypsy woman marveled. The very same one. And engraved on the back was a cross, and underneath, the Virgin Mary's prayer. Even the scratches are in the same places. No, there was no mistaking it. But what about this? How did this mirror get to Vanessa? Out loud, the Gypsy only said, Michael, you tell your mother that I'm only taking her gift for a while. I'll keep it. It's a blessing for her, the old Gypsy replied. And to change the subject, she asked, and how is the girl your mother has been hanging out with? Lisa is very good, but she hardly ever goes. That's probably why she's sad and silent all the time. But we still talk to her. And one time she even gave me a real smile. And I realized then that it's only temporary. She's sad, but someday she'll be happy again. Wendy says her mom died and Lisa survived the accident. That's why I think she's sad, because she misses her mom. I asked her if she was in pain, but she shook her head in the negative. Michael told me. It's been that way ever since. The boy would constantly stop by the old gypsy woman's house and tell her everything, all the news. In a few months, Molly had learned that Michael could tear up absolutely any berries in the garden, and that at night, Stephen actually lets out angry Caucasian sheepdogs. Apparently, he's afraid of something. And that the rich man feeds him and his mother well, and even bought them new clothes. But to Mom, he treats very respectfully, even calls her always only on you. And most importantly, the rich man kind of takes care of his mom, and even gives flowers. The boy was afraid for his mother. After all, she believes anyone, and in the end, she is offended. Molly, my mom and I are beggars. He'll kick us out one day. What if Mom believes him and falls in love? Said Michael to the gypsy and slapped himself on the forehead. The gypsy laughed. Yes, the boy has heard the wicked village gossip. Already he calls himself a beggar, Michael. But enough with the gossip. Not everyone cares how much money another person has, you understand? The gypsy girl asked him. But Aunt Evelyn and Aunt Miranda say differently, complained the boy. Aunt Evelyn and Aunt Miranda don't know much. That's why they're talking nonsense. You see, some people are only grown-ups on the outside, but in reality they are just children. They haven't grown up yet. So they puff themselves up and pretend to be clever, so that no one will guess that they are offended and have no brains at all, said the old gypsy. They're really mean kids. None of my peers are that mean. Even Benjamin, with whom we sometimes fight, sometimes apologizes. Michael sighed. He pictured Aunt Evelyn and Aunt Miranda as mean little girls, but in his imagination they looked ugly, and they had mean eyes and very long noses that they stuck everywhere and hurt people. And these two evil girls were hunchbacked for some reason, like they were carrying some kind of weight on their shoulders. Yeah, they were mean. That's why they didn't grow up. Because all evil things don't grow. They just go to sleep. That's if life teaches them. And they warm up. Reconciliatory, said the gypsy woman. I doubt that they suspect. The boy sighed again. Don't doubt it, Michael. Life is such a teacher. It can teach anyone what you want. But if you don't learn voluntarily, it can be painful. The gypsy remembered something of her own and sighed too. It doesn't matter how much money anyone has, and he has nothing to do with it. After all, the main thing in a person is kindness and love. All summer and fall passed in such conversations, and in December, Michael came suddenly with eyes like spoons. Molly, trouble, trouble, shouted the boy. The boy flew into the wicket. What's the matter? The old gypsy woman splashed her hands. Had she made a mistake in her mind? And then Vanessa and her little boy are offended. That was the first thought that came to her mind. I overheard one of Stephen's working uncles talking to our villagers. They want to set the house on fire. I told my mom right away, but she doesn't believe me. She says we're all good people, and that it was just drunken talk. But these men were not happy to be drunk, and they were talking in all seriousness. Even the fathers didn't agree. With eyes bulging with horror, said Michael. The boy only got used to a quiet and well-fed life, only found in the face on the wall his friend. For though the girl still did not speak, she smiled more and more often and showed him by signs what books she should read. But now they're all in danger. Did you talk to Uncle Stephen? Molly asked. Did you want to? He's just busy. He's preparing for some kind of conference. Uncle Stephen thinks I'm a child and can't tell him anything important. And Mom's not in a hurry to tell him. She says it's nothing that won't burn. How can it not burn? If in a week the house is going to burn down. Michael asked, Molly, is Mom really? The boy tried not to cry, but tears came to his eyes. Everything mixed in the child's soul, and fear for Mom and fear for the wall, and the fear of letting down Uncle Stephen, to whom he had become attached. After all, although he is small, but he is a protector and a real man. How could he let everyone down? The gypsy asked the boy to wait and came out with a small box. There is something for Uncle Stephen. When he sees and reads the note, he will believe you. Everything will be all right. Vanessa, hurry up, kid. And never doubt yourself. You're a smart boy and you're a protector. Just get him to read it as soon as possible. If he won't, tell him it's about Jenna. I wrote Jenna on the box so you wouldn't forget the name. The boy kissed his brother on the cheek. She was like a grandmother to him already. Then he patted her ear and ran back into the house to save everyone, heels blazing. Lucky for him, Uncle Stephen had not yet left for his conference and was standing by the car, giving Wendy his last orders. The boy realized he had one last chance, and if he didn't pay attention now, everyone would die, and it would be his fault. He had failed, and he had not protected the child's heartbeat feverishly. Apparently, it's at times like this that little boys gradually turn into real men. They're really mean kids. None of my peers are that mean. Even Benjamin, with whom we sometimes fight, sometimes apologizes. Michael sighed. He pictured Aunt Evelyn and Aunt Miranda as mean little girls, but in his imagination they looked ugly, and they had mean eyes and very long noses that they stuck everywhere and hurt people. And these two evil girls were hunchbacked for some reason, like they were carrying some kind of weight on their shoulders. Yeah, they were mean. That's why they didn't grow up. Because all evil things don't grow. They just go to sleep. That's if life teaches them. And they warm up. Reconciliatory, said the Gypsy woman. I doubt that they suspect. The boy sighed again. Don't doubt it, Michael. Life is such a teacher. It can teach anyone what you want. But if you don't learn voluntarily, it can be painful. The Gypsy remembered something of her own and sighed too. It doesn't matter how much money anyone has, and he has nothing to do with it. After all, the main thing in a person is kindness and love. All summer and fall passed in such conversations, and in December, Michael came suddenly with eyes like spoons. Molly, trouble, trouble, shouted the boy. The boy flew into the wicket. What's the matter? The old Gypsy woman splashed her hands. Had she made a mistake in her mind? And then Vanessa and her little boy are offended. That was the first thought that came to her mind. I overheard one of Stephen's working uncles talking to our villagers. They want to set the house on fire. I told my mom right away, but she doesn't believe me. She says we're all good people, and that it was just drunken talk. But these men were not happy to be drunk, and they were talking in all seriousness. Even the fathers didn't agree. With eyes bulging with horror, said Michael. The boy only got used to a quiet and well-fed life, only found in the face on the wall his friend. For though the girl still did not speak, she smiled more and more often and showed him by signs what books she should read. But now they're all in danger. Did you talk to Uncle Stephen? Molly asked. Did you want to? He's just busy. He's preparing for some kind of conference. Uncle Stephen thinks I'm a child and can't tell him anything important. And Mom's not in a hurry to tell him. She says it's nothing that won't burn. How can it not burn? If in a week the house is going to burn down? Michael asked. Molly, is Mom really? The boy tried not to cry, but tears came to his eyes. Everything mixed in the child's soul, and fear for Mom and fear for the wall, and the fear of letting down Uncle Stephen, to whom he had become attached. After all, although he is small, but he is a protector and a real man. How could he let everyone down? The Gypsy asked the boy to wait and came out with a small box. There is something for Uncle Stephen. When he sees and reads the note, he will believe you. Everything will be all right. Vanessa, hurry up, kid. And never doubt yourself. You're a smart boy and you're a protector. Just get him to read it as soon as possible. If he won't, tell him it's about Jenna. I wrote Jenna on the box so you wouldn't forget the name. The boy kissed his brother on the cheek. She was like a grandmother to him already. Then he patted her ear and ran back into the house to save everyone, heels blazing. Lucky for him, Uncle Stephen had not yet left for his conference and was standing by the car, giving Wendy his last orders. The boy realized he had one last chance, and if he didn't pay attention now, everyone would die, and it would be his fault. He had failed, and he had not protected the child's heartbeat feverishly. Apparently, it's at times like this that little boys gradually turn into real men. "Uncle Stephen from Wendy, a box for you from Wendy." The boy blurted out before he could even say hello. From Wendy. Surprisingly, Uncle Stephen looked at Michael very seriously and headed for the car. Tears spurted from Michael's eyes. Nothing was going to work out. He would just get in the car and drive away. He would say later and smile politely. The boy thought and rushed over, standing at the door, refusing to let the man in. "Michael, I just want to see what's in the box, and it's a long walk back to the house. But if you want, you can sit in the car with me too." Stephen smiled and patted the boy on the head. "I'll sit very quietly, and I won't peek at the note." With these words, the boy resolutely plumped himself into the back seat. Of course, adults should be trusted, but adults should be checked. That was the rule that little Michael adhered to. And this rule had never failed him yet. And yet he saw his mom's silver mirror in Uncle Stephen's box, but he didn't try to see what the note said. "You have to keep your word." And he just happened to see the mirror, to the surprise of Michael and all the villagers. In 15 minutes, the car stopped at Molly's house. The boy was happy to show where she lives. After all, Molly is smart. She will be able to convince Uncle Stephen to save everyone. When the jeep drove through their village, the villagers pointed their fingers at Michael and joked, and he leaned out of the window. "You've been hurting us with my mom, but look what a protector we have now." Molly looked like she was waiting for them, because she came out to meet them. "You turned around fast." The Gypsy woman smiled approvingly in astronomy. "You, James, play with my son in the yard. Make sure no one eavesdrops. And Uncle Stephen and I need to talk." With these words, she invited the rich man into the house and loudly turned on the radio on the veranda, so that neither Michael nor the gossip who had taken to the fence could hear anything. 20 minutes later, Molly came out with red eyes, and Aunt Stephen was not himself either. His face was suddenly new. But from the look on both of their faces, Michael realized that if there was going to be any change, it would be for the better. And that meant he'd done it. He didn't fail. He's a true protector. Michael was very surprised when Molly locked the gate and had the dog guard the house, and then got in the car with them. The villagers were even more surprised. But Michael didn't care. His heart sang like a morning bird. He felt that everything would be all right now. They drove into the yard, which was so familiar to Michael. The iron gates opened habitually, as if they had been swung open by invisible servants. "Wendy, let Lisa go down with Vanessa," Stephen asked quietly. The woman stared in surprise at the Gypsy, but without a word she went up the stairs. If the master said to do it, it had to be done. End of story. Vanessa was already down the stairs and was pushing the wheelchair with the help of a special device on the stairs. It wasn't a quick trip. We had to lay out the rails for the wheelchair. Did Molly collapse when she saw how bad her granddaughter looked? No, that's not what Lisa was like when they stopped by to visit with her and her daughter Jenna. Not only had the girl not grown, it was as if she'd shrunk in size. It had been 2 years. Molly sang a song in a language unknown to everyone and rushed towards her granddaughter. "Why don't you say something? Lisa, weren't you waiting for Grandma?" Molly asked, and then started singing again. Stephen was about to explain that his daughter had not said a word since her mother's death. But suddenly Lisa rose from the stroller towards Molly, and in a shrill, thin voice called out Grandma. Of course, this grandmother, who else to be, reread Molly in front of the surprised people, who were so dumbfounded, looking at this miracle. After all, the girl spoke for the first time, and the old Gypsy woman hugged her granddaughter and surrounded her in her arms like a little girl, continuing to hum her old Gypsy song. If anyone understood the words she sang, they would know that the grandmother promises to take her little granddaughter away from all troubles, to a land where there was never sorrow, and where everyone loves each other and no one dies. If you go there, whether you are sick or unhappy, you will become healthy and happy at once, and your heart becomes so light, so light. About an hour in the general bustle, everyone rejoiced that the little one on the wall was better. And then the girl, unable to stand such a shaking, fell asleep, and her father carried her into the room in his arms. And when Stephen returned, Molly said decisively, "It's time to get ready." They could set the house on fire earlier, maybe even today. They saw how those two assholes freaked out when they saw me coming. The Gypsy woman asked harshly. Stephen nodded silently. But they didn't try to start a fire today. The bride Gastarbeiter didn't try to set the house on fire until the next day. By that time, there was no one at home except the guards. But no one knew about it. Stephen, Molly, Vanessa, Wendy, and the kids had left the house through the emergency exit yesterday afternoon. "Well, are you going to tell me all about it, or are you going to do time on your own?" The uniformed man asked him sternly. He tried to refuse, saying he knew nothing, but quickly realized that this strategy would only worsen the already bad situation. So he gave up two accomplices. They turned out to be Michael and Liam, husbands of the village gossip columnists. "Well, Liam makes sense. He was fired from his job for drinking," said the head of security. "But it's about the certificate. Why do you need it, Michael? After all, you have your own store and things seem to be going well." Michael was silent. "You don't want to talk. All right, you can tell the police everything. By the way, does your wife know that you are going to increase the family income in this way?" asked the head of security. When Michael heard about Miranda, it was as if he woke up. His wife's name had always worked magic on him. He simply feared her, which meant he respected her. Don't say anything. Man to man, he got his ass kicked. Went to the city, gambled in the casino. Not enough money. Nowadays, young women are so pretentious. They're all about the presents. They are so corrupt, city women. Michael spit. "Did your wife forbid you to have affairs with rural women?" the chief of security asked. The question was rhetorical, and he didn't wait for an answer. Everything was even simpler with Liam. He'd gone completely rogue. They threatened to put him in jail if he didn't pay back all the money for the flour. So they decided to set fire to the house. And while the noise was going on, they robbed him. As for the migrant worker, he was easy to deal with. After all, he was a dope lover and tried to get it in the village. So the men realized that it would be very easy to make a deal with him. It took a couple hours to figure it all out. Each man tried to blame it on the other. But the general sense was clear. No pity for the rich man. That's why he's a rich man, to share with the people. And the fact that people could burn in the house, no one, apparently, did not care. The head of security went out for a smoke and continued to listen through the surveillance cameras to hear what these figures would say again. "I guess the bitch had us pawned off," Liam said briefly. He still couldn't forgive the woman he had seduced, that she had come back to their village and held him at gunpoint. But how could she know that? Michael asked. "Unless that bitch Vanessa overheard us somewhere." The man, like his older comrade, could not forgive Vanessa either. That he dumped her and left her. He was one of the many people who struggle with guilt in a simple and effective way. Hurt someone, blame them, and all that. Caused a lot of harm. Not a problem. Make a lot of accusations, but it's sad and difficult not to fix the damage you've done. He didn't say anything. He was broken, but he realized that he was in trouble. How will he get back to his homeland? The whole village collected money for his trip. They chose him as the most responsible and honest guy. And what did he do to work it all off? To pay back 100-fold. He let everyone down. What's he gonna say to the uncle who helped him the most? How will he look his grandfather in the eye? He'll be a shepherd for the rest of his life. And none of the local girls will ever look at him. The best he'll get is a widow with many children, older than him, with a terrible temper. And that's if he's lucky. While he was thinking about it, a police car pulled up. Stephen told the head of security to take these beauties there. And when they were put into the car, all three of them breathed a sigh of relief. After all, Everyone's imagination had painted something like they would be beaten for a long time and then rolled in concrete. So the prospect of interrogation and scandal with their relatives didn't seem so frightening anymore. Vanessa, I too, like you, had a child by a married man. The Gypsy woman told me in the hotel where they were all staying for the time of the showdown. There was plenty of time, and Molly leisurely told her story about how the husband of the village gossip Evelyn and part-time failed arsonist didn't tell her he was married and promised to marry, but a little bit. I mean, he's so ugly, like a fawn, bald, toothless, and shaking all the time. Surprised Vanessa. He's like that now, said Molly. And then he was, what a beautiful blonde, gray eyes like lakes. My daughter Jenna was like him. So beautiful. I would have done anything for my daughter. Any humiliation, just to be with her. I fell at my father's feet. But my family got angry when they found out I was involved with a man of a different nationality. And I changed my religion to Orthodox Christianity. I wanted to marry Liam, and I even got Jenna baptized. But he kept postponing our wedding. And then I found out he was married. So I came back, and they put Jenna in an orphanage. And I was married off to an old gypsy. He couldn't even walk anymore. He was older than I am now. His belly flared to his knees, and he was mad as hell to beat me. He was jealous even of a Pole, and made me work like a slave. Honestly, Vanessa hoped the old devil would die. But he lived and lived, lived and lived. 20 years I waited, and only he was gone. I gathered all the valuable things I had and ran hand in hand. But where to go and where to look for Jenna? I decided to live in the village. Where is Jenna? My father lived with his wife. He didn't oppress me or turn me against him. I never left the village. I sold all my jewelry and found out that my daughter was adopted by rich people. She got a good education and married Stephen. And then the rest of the story you know. Almost all of it. Molly was silent. What do you mean Jenna came to see you? Lisa, for milk. I was surprised to see Lisa. She looked so familiar. I recognized Jenna from the photo, but I couldn't tell it was them. They were dressed very plainly when they came to see you, weren't they? Said Vanessa. So it was to keep the gossip down, and so her father wouldn't recognize her. So Jenna pretended to buy goat's milk from me, said the old gypsy. I found her myself. That's how fate plays tricks on people. Turns out Jenna didn't live that far from here. And when she heard about me, she asked her husband to build a house near the village. That's how we met, my pillow. We told each other a lot of things. We couldn't get enough of each other. And then that accident. Molly stopped talking. Why isn't Stephen talking to you? Did he know about you before? Vanessa asked. He did, but ever since Jenna died, he wouldn't let me see my granddaughter. Thought I was a suspicious gypsy. That's one word for it. How did your Michael tell you about the arson? I decided to write to him. I couldn't let all my loved ones die. If I'd known that Lisa was waiting for me and that she was in such a bad way, I would have made up my mind sooner. Molly smacked herself on the forehead with all her might. What's with the row? And that mirror is mine. Why did you give Stephen the note? Vanessa decided to ask. So Michael did peek. Molly smiled. No, he didn't mean to. He's very honest. It just happened by accident. Stephen opened a box in the car. That's when he saw it. Vanessa blushed. It was against her will that she had blurted out a military secret. But she really wanted to know why Molly had sent her mom's gift to Stephen. Yeah, I know Michael's a good guy. Well, since you know about the mirror anyway, I guess it's time I told you that too. Have you ever noticed how much you look like my daughter Jenna? Asked Molly, looking Vanessa straight in the huge gray eyes. But what are you, a theater major? She's such a beauty, and I'm just a bugged and silly, muttered Vanessa. She had noticed more than once how strangely Stephen looks at her, as if she were a beauty. He compliments her on flowers, he says. He tries to stay up late with her in the evening and talk to her about something. Is it because she looks like his late wife? If you were dressed in expensive clothes, you'd look like her twin, Molly summarized in a tone that would not accept objections. I know my daughter well. Molly paused and continued. I didn't want to tell you, because it's not my secret. But your mother didn't give birth to you from your father. Your father was infertile. Only he didn't want to admit it, even though the test results came back. So your mom asked Rick, the local womanizer, to make her a baby. That's what Liam told me when he wanted to hurt her. So your daughter Jenna is my half-sister, and Lisa is your niece. Vanessa was surprised. But I still don't understand what this has to do with my mom's mirror. Vanessa, I didn't know your mom at all. But you look so much like Rick that I have no doubt he's telling the truth. And as for the mirror, my grandmother gave it to me. She kept it a secret from everyone that she'd converted to the Orthodox faith. The mirror was passed down the female line, but my daddy wouldn't give it to my mother. If she did, the family would have found out, and my grandmother would have been kicked out. She prayed in secret, and when she saw my cross, she gave me the mirror, and Rick stole it from me. He wanted to impress your mom with an expensive gift, and by that time, he already liked me, Molly said, and added I sold everything and ordered a copy from memory and put it with my daughter. She kept it all her life, because I knew Stephen would notice the mirror right away. It's the first and the real one, and it really does bring happiness. Do you keep it? Molly asked. I do. Very Molly. It's a mirror. It saved my life when Michael bullied me. And the villagers. I was going to throw myself into the river. But where's my dead sister's other mirror? I keep it for Lisa. When she grows up, will I give it to her? Said Stephen as he stealthily entered the room. Vanessa, did you say that we are getting married with you? Asked the man. Vanessa blushed. She wanted to say it, but she was afraid that Molly would consider it a betrayal. So she had taken advantage of her resemblance to Jenna and was taking her husband and her daughter. Then the wedding should definitely be celebrated in the village. Suddenly, the old gypsy clapped her hands and became like a mischievous little girl. Why? Let the village detractors grieve, and good people will rejoice. A little, but not in the village. It's terribly inconvenient, especially after what you told me. It's all right. It's all right. Let them think about their behavior, said the gypsy and added. And you know that you should give rich money gifts to all the guests, but invite only those who have treated you and Michael humanely. Molly's eyes lit up even more. We can easily organize that. Stephen smiled. How much should we give? He asked Molly. Well, at least 200,000, so that those who called Vanessa a young valley would be unbearably greedy, summed up the gypsy. I'm the one who can go out like that. Stephen agreed easily. Vanessa timidly tried to object, but no one listened to her. Molly and Stephen were making up details of a rich wedding in the village. They were so giddy that they reminisced for a long time and regretted that they had offended a good woman and her son. A little row. Well, let's invite everyone. After all, God says to forgive and love everyone. Vanessa suggested. God says to forgive and love. You're right, Vanessa, but we must forgive skillfully so that people can cope and realize their mistakes. You can't make monsters out of people. After all, tough love is the most difficult thing, said the old gypsy woman, absolutely serious. A couple months later, the village was buzzing and dancing with a wedding. Angry villagers resented the fact that the bewildered bride did not even call them to the wedding. But it was a treat. The tables were bursting with food. It was rumored that all the guests received generous cash gifts. Grandpa Robert and Emily were especially happy. I've never seen Vanessa so happy. The girl deserved it, said the village teacher, and right next to the handkerchief tears. Yeah, look at the way that Stephen looks at her. That's the way I used to look at my wife, smiled Grandpa Robert. Molly only remained silent and smiled. She didn't want to say anything. Vanessa had been like a daughter to her for a long time. She'd known her since she was a teenager. And Michael had been like a grandson to her since she was in diapers. And she had long since accepted Stephen. Of course, at first Molly doubted that he loved Vanessa sincerely and was afraid that he simply chose a similar woman to transgress his grief. But on the eve of the wedding, Stephen had told her, "So, Aunt Molly, do you think I've fallen out of love with Jenna? Or what? Vanessa just her replacement?" asked the old gypsy woman directly by the man. "Sometimes I think one thing, sometimes another," Molly admitted honestly. "To tell you the truth, at first I wanted to marry Vanessa because she looks like Jenna, and also because Lisa liked her right away. But then she suddenly became my friend. You might find that strange. With Jenna, it was love at first sight and passion. We lived with her like we were on wings. Vanessa was different. Of course, she is a beautiful woman, but I loved her as a close person and hoped that this friendship would gradually turn into something more," Stephen said thoughtfully. "Did it work out?" Molly asked quietly. "I wouldn't have married her otherwise," Stephen replied. "It's not a replacement for Jenna. It's just a different love, much more earthy. Vanessa is a woman near and dear to me. She bakes me pies and strokes my head. And I'm happy. At first I thought she was being silly, but she asked me once, 'Stephen, is it possible to forget the love of your life so quickly?' And what did you say?" asked the old gypsy woman. I answered the truth. "I will never forget Jenna. No one will take her place in my heart." My heart just got bigger. There's room for Vanessa and Michael. "And I think that gradually my soul will become bigger and bigger," said Stephen. "That's good," said Molly. "Can I come with you?" "Well, of course, Auntie. It's only thanks to you that Lisa is walking again, albeit with a crutch. And she started talking to you. You're like magic. I apologize for not letting you see your granddaughter. I was afraid, very afraid I'd lose her to the wall. She kept waking up crying at first, saying I dreamed of my mom. And I went to her. 'Why am I here again, Daddy? Why do I hurt? Why didn't Mommy take me with her?' The old gypsy woman put the man's head on her shoulder and said quietly, 'Everything will be all right. You live and learn forever. I've never been angry with you. You're a good man. I always knew it. My Jenna wouldn't have chosen anyone else.' 6 months later, Emily used the money to fulfill her dream and opened an atelier for girls in the village. Together, they designed some wonderful models of everything in the world. The village teacher didn't take any money for it, and if someone couldn't buy the materials, it was all at the atelier's expense. The secret sponsor of the whole thing was Stephen. He persuaded his good friend, a supplier of fabrics, to undercut the prices of everything that Emily bought, so that the profit was invariably much higher than all the costs. And the village children were learning a great skill. For some, it promised to become a profession. Emily had not given up teaching literature, but now her long-held dream had come true. As for Grandfather Robert, he bought some equipment and even made his own club. After all, he also loved the village children. And time flies by quickly and unnoticed. When you work for people, many villagers after the sensational wedding began to live better. Some bought a cow with the gift money. Others repaired the house. Some paid for their children's education. A fourth bought a hearing aid. And the fifth just went on vacation. That's it. Everyone who has said a single kind word to a single mother, or even just not. Too many of the wicked have been rewarded for their kindness, but the evil tongues were convinced that the punishment for their sarcasm and cruelty could still be received in this life. However, Evelyn did not have to wait long for her loyalists. For attempted arson, they were given only a suspended sentence. The worst punishment for the women was the fact that so hated Molly and Vanessa and their sympathizers ride like cheese in butter. And here they are, so righteous, struggling from bread to water. And they are lucky for these walking bombers, and a decent woman nowadays only has to live on her wages. Cindy Evelyn said angrily. Her husband's store had gone under. It turned out that Michael had a lot of debts, and they have accumulated not only because of his addiction to gambling, but also because of the money spent on drinking and partying. But the family, of course, about this never told anyone. From her words in all the troubles of her husband was to blame the evil rich man. It was he, they say, rolled out a huge fine and indiscriminately accused of attempted arson. And drunk Michael didn't plan any of this. He's just an honest man who can't fight back against a rich man who bribed everyone. That's what I say, Evelyn echoed her. She was in debt like a silk for a man too. And nothing had changed for Rick. And he was on another bender, as usual. But she had to pay him a lot of money to cover up his stealing from the factory. But Evelyn would never admit that her hubby was to blame, either, if her words were to be believed. So it was an evil gypsy woman who gave it to him. So he wasn't himself, didn't know what he was doing. The women spent their time in idle talk with each other, and especially Strong and infuriated by the fact that at the wedding all kinds of fools and dummies got them rich gifts. Each of them was secretly thinking that they should have sucked up to Vanessa in time. Maybe they could have gotten their piece of the pie too. About finally becoming normal people and stop gossiping, discussing, and making themselves look approximately perfect. That never occurred to the women. Grandma screamed at the old gypsy girl at the same time Lisa and Michael. Look what she's doing while you can't see. The old gypsy, Molly, smiled. Tyson tried to steal another delicious meal from the table, but did it delicately. He waited until everyone had eaten and carefully eliminated the leftovers. Honey, you can't do that. Am I not feeding you well? He reprimanded the absurd. The one guiltily rubbed her skirt and began to lick his fingers. Peeking out of her house slippers. Grandma, look what my daddy gave me, a magic mirror. I got it from my mom. Lisa showed the gypsy the silver mirrors. Molly remembered it very well. She had sold everything she had and ordered a copy to replace the one Liam had stolen from her. However, she did not regret the disappearance and the fact that life had brought her to a dishonest man. After all, the mirror really turned out to be magical. The original went to a woman who became her second daughter, and now she has 2 grandchildren instead of 1. And my mom has one just like it, said Michael. She looks into it whenever something's bothering her. Well, that's what Molly said, because the mirror is magic, so it dissolved to bring happiness. And your mom. And on the wall, the mirror knew you were gonna be brother and sister. Is that why you sent it to your dad in the box with the note? Did you let him know that I was his son? Michael marveled, remembering last year's story. Well, not exactly. The mirror told your father that you were his son and that he should marry your mother. The mirror didn't tell me anything. It just told me to put it in the box, said the old gypsy woman. Grandma, are you kidding? We're adults now and we know that mirrors can't talk. Even old ones like this. Lisa and Michael shouted in one voice. They usually can't. You're right about that. But in some exceptional cases, anything can happen. Molly smiled. That's true. Michael, I know that for a fact. Lisa screamed. How can you prove it? Asked the boy. Daddy said I'd never have a brother or a sister, but now I have a brother, you. And I overheard that your mommy has my little sister growing in her belly. Lisa said excitedly. Wow, marveled Michael. So mirrors can talk too. I'll have to tell my grandfather Robert. He used to say that I would have a good father and a brother and sisters in my life. Do you know why? Michael asked his sister. Why? Lisa asked curiously. She was waiting for some more continuation of the story about the magic talking mirrors. Because I was on my best behavior, Michael summarized, and lifted his chin proudly. The girl wanted to argue with him, but her grandmother made a cautionary gesture, saying that sometimes boys need to believe not only in miracles, but also in themselves. Lisa understood her and with a serious look agreed with her brother. He realized that he might have exaggerated a little, but he was still very pleased with himself and grateful to his little sister.